You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 161. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
And I think that's important in leadership. When you have a sense of your own purpose, and that purpose is able to intersect and weave in with the purpose of your church, there's a real correspondence and a correlation there that certainly strengthens everyone involved for the ministry that needs to happen.
Today we have a conversation with Ken Ramsey. We start off talking with Ken about how he defines courageous leadership. We turn the corner and he invites us to explore the intersection between our personal purpose and the church's purpose. And then he moves into answering tough questions that we sometimes get asked as leaders. And in the local church, sometimes the question can come like this: is there a place for me here? Then we move on to focusing during this time that it seems like we are constantly adapting. And Ken is going to give you 3 simple words that just might frame for you and the people that you are leading a way to navigate this season and navigate change in general. And then finally, and don't miss this piece, because it really is the point of listening to this whole episode. There's lots of nuggets. I've just named a few for you, but this one I don't want you to miss. There's a word of wisdom that Ken offers about the future of the church and a word of hope. So as you listen to this episode, stick around through the very end, because I don't want you to miss those 2 things. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast, and you're looking for episode 161. Or as always, you can go directly to the episode at transformingmission.org/161. Without any further wait, here's our conversation with Ken Ramsey.
Ken, welcome to LeaderCast. What we want to do is to introduce you to the people who are listening to us. So tell us who you are and what you do to get paid.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to share in this context. I am Ken Ramsey. I'm the lead pastor at Bridgeport United Methodist Church in Bridgeport, West Virginia. Bridgeport, West Virginia is a community with a population of about 8,500 proper. Our church is about 1,800 members, a little larger, quite a larger constituency than that. But I sometimes can't believe that I get paid, but that's what I get paid to do as senior pastor. But it is a lifelong calling that I've responded to, and that's the reason I say I can't believe I get paid, because to be able to have the privilege of leading in this context and proclaiming the gospel of Christ is the joy of my life. So
how old were you when you started this?
Well, started this journey when I was 17. For those of you who are listening, you can't do that anymore. But back then you could. In 1980, I was appointed to the Princeton charge with 6 churches right out of high school. Kind of rushed quickly through the candidacy process. Again, you can't do that anymore, but we did. And it was what started off rapidly. It's turned into a great journey. So this is indeed my 40th year proper of being in United Methodist ministry.
Well, Ken, one of the focus for us is around courageous leadership. So what does being a courageous leader mean to you?
Well, I think being a courageous leader means, first of all, you have to be a person who's willing to be led. Being a leader to me means I'm willing to be led, I'm willing to be shaped, I'm willing to be molded, particularly in my field by the Jesus of the gospel. So I think before you can lead others, you have to know what it is to follow, and following Jesus and being a part of the body of Christ is very important. I think also being a courageous leader means that you are willing to face your fears and embrace your anxieties. You're able to recognize that fear is part of the journey. The reason I say that is sometimes I think when people hear the word courage or courageous, they think, well, I have no fear at all. I can just barge right in and do this. I don't think it's that at all. I think the courageous aspect of courageous leadership means I acknowledge the fact that I am going to have fears and anxieties, but I'm able to face those and embrace those. And then I guess finally, it just means courageous leadership means I'm willing to keep focused. I'm focused in the present. As I say to myself all the time and others around me, I'm focused in the present while pointing to the horizon, pointing to what's ahead. I think it's that sort of that dual task for courageous leadership. So that'd kind of be the best summary that I could give, I think.
Well, with that in mind, we wanted to, each month in 2021, we're focusing on a different theme for courageous leaders. And the question we've asked ourselves is, what do courageous leaders need to know, do, or understand? And we've said that they need to understand and live out their purpose. So in January, the theme is purpose. So for our conversation today, we're going to focus on how you continue to stay focused on your purpose and the giftedness in the midst of all the competing demands and invitations. So that's some direction for our conversation.
Okay, very good. Very good.
So as we dive into that, Ken, I'm wondering if you can share with us and our listeners, how do you define your purpose? And maybe also, what's the purpose of the ministry that you lead?
Sure. Well, my purpose, I've always said, is to follow Jesus faithfully, to proclaim his good news, to allow the good news that arrived in Jesus to guide me. But in terms of larger purpose, to me, that means that it guides me in my family life, it guides me in my social life, and then it guides me in my ministry life within the body of Christ. I think it's not just confined to my particular professional environment, but my personal environments and the atmospheres and arenas that I find myself in personally also are very important in terms of moving forward with my purpose and staying true to simply, I know it sounds simplistic to some, but to follow Jesus faithfully. If I were to summarize it, that's what it is. And that's for every single area of my life. We fail at that at times, but nevertheless, he draws us back, I think, to that purpose. And in terms of the ministry that I lead at Bridgeport United Methodist Church, more recently, especially coming out of 2018 and 2019, we shifted a focus. It's not that we weren't focused there, but our purpose became more defined by Matthew 25. And that is, we are seeking to become a community of faith that's in ministry with and for the least, the last, the lonely, the left out. And we've allowed that to be our primary purpose in terms of focusing the good news of Christ, because we found, the reason I say coming out of 2018, 2019, and who would have even dreamed about 2020 at the time, but there were a lot of distractions happening in our denomination as a whole, and a lot of side conversations here and there, a lot of feelings, opinions, so forth and so on. And we finally said, look, we have work to do on behalf of the kingdom. What's the purpose of the kingdom as announced in Christ Jesus? Well, Jesus himself, one place among others, Matthew 25, when you do it to the least of these. And so we decided then that would be absolutely our purpose, and other things would not distract us then from that purpose.
So am I correct in hearing you say that as you, as a leader, stay focused on Jesus, and as you helped your congregation get focused on Matthew 25 and what that ministry was all about, there was a convergence of your individual purpose coming to life in the context of a local church?
No question that they not only complemented one another, but they actually intersect directly. And I think that's important in leadership. When you have a sense of your own purpose, and that purpose is able to intersect and weave in with the purpose of your church, there's a real correspondence and a correlation there that certainly strengthens everyone involved for the ministry that needs to happen.
Ken, I know several things about you that we won't talk about, but I know some other things about you that you started a congregation just less than a mile away from the Bridgeport Church, and in fact, it was just a satellite. Tell us something about the decisions that went into that. I'm sure there were some courageous decisions that had to be made because it was a congregation that had closed, and the building was sitting empty, and then the big church up the street all of a sudden makes a decision to do something. How does that fit the purpose that you were just talking about?
Well, it was an important decision a few years ago when we realized that congregation, a smaller facility and a smaller church, would be closed because of the numbers had gone down to just 2 or 3 folk, and financial sustainability and so forth and so on. And we wanted to try to keep that as a viable ministry site. It's actually located right beside the high school and middle school in our town. It's very visible. It's a very visible location, but it had kind of blended into the landscape, if you will, over time. And so our leadership team and the folks in the church decided to take that on. We spent several months, about 6 to 8 months, getting things ready there, not only in terms of physical plant, but also preparing ourselves. We made the decision that we would begin with an alternative worship service, another opportunity at that campus. We call that our Johnson Avenue campus because of its location. We recruited over time a group of people who would be willing to be a seed group. That was another very important decision because many people thought that, well, you'll draw people away from the worship services that we currently have going on, which we had 3 or 4 worship services already going on, 3 at the main campus and 1 at another retirement community nearby. But so we asked the seed people if they would attend one and serve one in order to help bridge that gap. And that took some major courage, not just for me, but for everyone involved, honestly. And so people agreed to be seed people for that worship service. In other words, they would still attend one at the main campus just to sort of help bridge the gap there for 6 months was the agreement. We developed a covenant relationship for 6 months. They would attend one at the main campus, and then they would go for the 9:45 service at the second campus and be willing to serve there. Part of their service is just attending, but the other part is they would serve in terms of being responsible for different parts of the service. So it kind of unfolded from there, and it grew tremendously. Prior to COVID, we were having anywhere from 80 to 100 people there regularly in that worship service. And the so-called main campus, it actually kept growing, and those gaps that people feared would be very noticeable began to be filled in as well.
So let me try one more. Can you give us an example of a recent time that you thought to yourself, this is what I was created to do and who I was created to be? We're still talking about that courageous leadership and the purpose.
Yep. Yes. Well, I think briefly, I think of 2 things really when I think of recent times. We shifted to mostly online worship. We've had a smattering of in-person opportunities throughout the COVID experience, but not very many. But in the course of that, believe it or not, and many people I'm sure experience this, but you actually pick up a congregation or an audience that you did not have previously. And I had a call just a couple of months ago from a person who had been listening online, had been watching our services online. And to kind of shorten the story, because of his own experiences with church in the past and because of his own particular identity as an individual, he actually reached out and wanted to talk with me. Started with an email, but then eventuated into a conversation on the phone. And he said, in listening and witnessing what I have online, I just want to ask you a question that I've asked a few times in my church journey, which has been a while, he said, and that is there a place for me in the church? Because everywhere I've gone, I've eventually got the message that it's okay that you're here, but you really don't have a place. And I appreciated his honesty at that point. But I have to tell you that at that moment, I thought, okay, Ken, this is why you're called. Where's your answer now? Somebody finally puts it to the bottom line. Is there a place for me here in the church? And I'll not go into that, but the short of it is, I said, absolutely, there is. Keep worshiping with us online. I look forward to the day when we can connect again in person, and I'll be able to demonstrate that more visibly to you. But since then, we've had a few conversations, and I just felt like this is my purpose. Follow Jesus. Wherever he leads, I will follow. Though none go with me sometimes, I still will follow. And the second one, recently as well, I was asked by the bishop in my annual conference if I would lead and moderate and design a piece on this systemic racism and white privilege. And that was important work. All four bishops that, as I said, I've been in ministry 40 years, and I'm privileged that all four of those bishops that I've served with under are still living. So all four of those bishops were a part of this conversation. And we designed a dialogue and a symposium type with video segments and so forth and so on. It wasn't a tough decision to do that because it's an important issue, and I certainly want to be one who helps address it. However, in the climate that we're living in right now, I know that the particular feedback from stepping forward, and we discussed this, the bishops and I, particular feedback that you may get in stepping forward to address it in a very intentional and honest, open way, can have its own negative responses from time to time. But we felt it way too important to ignore. And that whole issue of systemic racism and white privilege has come to a point where it needs to be more than just a flash in the pan. I said to them, so many issues like this in our church, people just kind of nod and smile because they figure everything's going to go back to the way it was before. Eventually, if they just nod and smile long enough, then everything will go back the way I wanted it. And I don't want that to happen, especially with regard to this issue. And so stepping up, again, do you have a little fear and anxiety in those type of things? Absolutely you do. But what you do is you move toward the fear, not away from the fear. You face the fear, and God will provide.
Okay, Ken, there's a million different directions that I could go with what what you just shared and what you have illustrated so beautifully. What I'm really thinking is you've had opportunities just down the road, a church closes and you say yes. Your bishops that you have served under as a pastor for 40 years invite you into something and you say yes. I'm guessing here, but I don't think it's too much of a guess that you probably have invitations left and right, forward and behind you all the time to do things, to step into leading in different ways. And some of those times you have to say no. I'm wondering if you can share how do you make that decision? You have been gifted by God. You have certain gifts. You have a calling on your life. Is there a way that you normally go about deciding yes or no? And it may be as simple as praying about it. I'm just curious if you might.
Yeah. Well, I think it's multi-tiered at that point in terms of, and you're right, as with anyone who like Tim has been at it for an extremely long time. You do get various invitations from various corners, and I do think your first consideration from a spiritual level, you do pray, you do seek discernment. But as a leader with particular responsibilities, you also have a practical considerations. It is not wrong to say if you spread yourself too thin, you'll not be able to make the impact in the areas that you choose. And you have to be realistic about that. So the very practical, realistic level, I think it's not that perhaps all of those invitation or opportunities, all of them could be of equal importance. I don't think necessarily, now there would be sometimes you might say yes or no based on the importance of it, but many of them are of equal importance. It's really not about that. It's about praying spiritually for your own direction, but also being practical about what you can do and still make an impact. You want to be able to do things with the proper energy, with the proper amount of enthusiasm, with the proper amount of insight and thought. And if you try to do too many of those, you'll fail on every single level of that. So when you're facing competing demands, certainly we would all like to do it all, but we know we can't. So you have to be very practical about it. And then there's the emotional / mental aspect of it. And that is, you only have so much, all of us only have so much energy to give. I should say, we only have so much best energy to give. And as I mentioned in my larger purpose, my family, my spouse, my adult children, my new grandchild, they're very important in my life. And you only have so much energy to give. And so you have to kind of have your own energy gauge, if you will, psychologically, mentally, emotionally. You have to be in touch as a leader. You have to be in touch with that energy meter in there a little bit, because no matter how I feel, no matter how gifted you are, if you're not in touch with the best, being able to give your best of energy to where you need to do it, eventually you'll be depleted. And, that's when discouragement, disappointment, burnout, et cetera, begin to happen in people's lives. So that's sort of my own process of thought, if you will, when I go through. And, or, of course, in this case, if you've had a friend for 30 or 40 years and he calls you and asks you to do something, in that case, you can't say no.
Oh, yes, you could. and you responded in a very short time frame to an invitation. So we are especially grateful for that. Thank you for naming those different avenues, if I can call them that, of discernment that leaders need to consider. Sometimes the leaders that I have the privilege of working with, we only stay in one of those lanes and we forget the other ones. It's this is important, so I'm going to do it. And we lose sight of, yeah, but do you have the energy? Do you have the capacity? And what's the impact on our family and our most important relationships going to be? So thank you for articulating that. You've just illustrated courageous leadership. It's all of those things. It's not just one. 2020 was a year that was filled with constant adaptation. I anticipate much of 2021 may be the same. How do you remain focused on your purpose in the midst of that constant adaptation? If you've already addressed that in another way, we can skip it and move on. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, briefly, there's an example I use with my folk here and the leadership team here, as well as other pastors that I've been working with, especially coming out of 2020 and hopefully beginning to emerge on the other side. And that is, I really, and it's even more so at another time in my life, but occasionally still now, I really enjoyed backpacking in wilderness areas. And much to the chagrin of my family, I oftentimes did that by myself because I liked the solitude. But I had an old guy when I first got into backpacking. He said, you always have to have a plan, Ken. Something can go wrong in the wilderness. When you're in the wilderness, things can happen that you do not expect. You cannot plan for everything. You have to have something in mind. And so I came up with this little 3 points. That's the way I preach. Tim knows that. But and the first is, if something occurs, if you find yourself in the wilderness and something unexpected happens, yes, adaptation is the very first thing. You have to adapt to what's occurred. But after that, if you're going to be there a while, the next thing I said, okay, if I'm going to be here a while, after I've adapted, then I have to adopt. I have to adopt new practices. I have to adopt a new way of living. I have to adopt new skills that are going to get me through this particular thing. And I think that's what's happened to people in 2020. We've adapted, but we've also adopted, for example, being able to interview in the way we're interviewing now, virtually. We've adopted new practices. And then when we reemerge from that, we have to then become adept. Naturally, I'm going to do some alliteration in 3 points, Tim. We have to become adept at those skills, because what we've learned and the landscape that is now changed is not just going to go back to what it was. So that's sort of my own model that I've used with my leadership team and others. Say, yes, we've adapted. We're adapting. We've adopted new skills, new ways of living, new ways of doing church, so forth and so on. You adopt those, but then to sustain it, you have to become adept at them. You have to become good at them. more effective at them. Don't just say, boy, I'm glad I don't have to do that online stuff anymore. I can finally go back to church in person. I say to those who are listening, please don't do that. Your virtual product is going to be just as important, if not more so. Things that you've learned during this journey in the wilderness are going to serve you well. So there's my adapt, adopt, adept little thing I put together when I started backpacking.
That's good. Yeah, you've taught us all something today.
I started to tell Sarah when we started that before it was over with, we'd have an alliteration.
Oh, yeah. You have a lot of those.
With what you've just said, is there any other wisdom that you'd share with leaders about how to stay focused on their purpose?
In terms of the staying focused part, and we touched on this earlier, I think a daily disciplined time of prayer and devotion, please don't compromise that. That has to be a regular part of a person's life. Avoiding the distractions, avoid unhealthy ways of coping. All of these can take us away from our purpose. Connect with those that you trust and that you can share with openly your fears, your anxieties, your feelings of inadequacy, whatever they may be. And I guess a final word maybe I would say is in terms of not keeping your focus on your purpose is the noise of our culture can be so loud sometimes with the polarization that happens and other issues that abound for us. If we allow the volume level that can really be loud in our culture to get our attention too much, then that still small voice of God, God often comes in the still small voice. And I would say with regard to our purpose, particularly the still, as I say to my people, the still small voice of the marginalized, they can get drowned out by the sheer volume of the cultural situation. So I would say find a way to decrease that volume of the cultural chaos so that you make sure you're listening to those still small voices that can lead you forward.
So over and over again, can you continue to illustrate that leading takes courage and staying focused on your purpose takes courage. So I'm wondering if you can share what characteristics of other leaders fuel your courage, or maybe said in a different way, what characteristics of other leaders make a good partner in leadership for you?
Well, I'll go back to what I just mentioned. The first is the spiritual life that I've witnessed in people who have been examples for me and continue to be examples for me. Their devotion to their own spiritual life and cultivation of their relationship with Christ fuels my own courage, if you will, fuels my own leadership concepts and view and everything else. And then from that, when you look around, and I think of people both in the past and the present who have truly inspired me as well as mentored me. After that, I think it's just their dedication, their things we've mentioned, their dedication, their focus, their compassion, and the fact that they are, since we're talking about courageous leadership, they are encouragers. Even in the face of discouragement, they are encouragers. And to me, to be able to hold that out for folk is truly a word of hope that inspires us to be the leaders we need to be.
All that's wonderful, because it's exactly what I thought you'd be saying, and we wanted people to hear. What courageous decisions are you making right now as a leader?
Well, the decisions that have called upon my own sense of courage, as well as those with whom I serve and lead, most immediately, and I know we're listening to this a little later, but probably will still be greatly influenced in that. The whole idea of the virtual message, the online services, not making the decision at various points not to gather in person, to try to be a part of helping to curtail a pandemic that turns out to be much worse than we originally probably thought it would be, and trying to move forward again in the midst of that with the pressures all around you. And I know pastors and other leaders who may be listening probably face that. There may be some people who parted ways with you as a result of that, decided to take another path, and so forth and so on. But that, when you discern a direction and know that you need to move in that direction, that's where you, again, have to be realistic. You're going to have anxiety and fear about it, but you have to do it because it's the right thing to do. And in fact, I've tried to even reframe a little bit. I'm sure you have, and others who are listening have as well. The fact is, the early church, had to meet in very small groups under very difficult circumstances, often in very small groups, and the church thrived, the church grew, they were able to stay true to their purpose and so forth. So I think the virtual product and the message that we're having to put out in this way has been a part of that. And also what I'm trying to do now is to say to people, this will not be a restart. It will not be a reset. For a church of our size, it will be a rebuild. And the distinction I make there is, I think many people, and this requires a certain degree of courage, I suppose, to just put it out there and say, look, it's not going to be, okay, this is, give you an example, in our services, March the 8th, prior to the pandemic, that weekend, with all of our services together, we had over 700 people in worship. The next weekend, we had 0. And even the smattering of in-person things that we've done have been very small because of people being, as they should be, health conscious. So you're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden, when this is quote unquote all over, 700 and some people are going to show up instantaneously. Because of the length of time and the shifting of patterns that's taken place, we're going to be in a rebuild situation. And so that's what I'm laying the groundwork for. We're actually in a process right now. We're taping this here in December. I know some of you won't hear it till January, but we're moving forward with a volunteer lay pastor network where 20 or so lay pastors will be responsible for 20 or so families within our church. And we'll use that network then to rebuild everything from just contacting them saying, hey, it's time to come back, we need you here, to various other care ministries, as well as inspiring messages that we'll push out through social platforms and so forth. So we're in a process of positioning ourselves for a different future.
So in that process of rebuilding, which it sounds like you're already starting to do, because none of us know when we're going to be on the quote unquote other side of this, what do you celebrate God doing in your life or leadership? And let's just put that in the context of the last 3 months.
Well, I'll tell you what, I cannot convey through an audio the absolute overwhelming assurance of God's presence during this time is truly amazing. The God that we serve and worship has once again surprised and astounded me and caused me to fall to my knees in utter awe that God could sustain and keep us moving and keep us connected in strange and difficult times. That has been the most wonderful thing in the world. I use an image of, I was raised in the rural area in very rural West Virginia. And so I was out in the woods with my dad before daylight many times. And my dad, when we would hear something in the woods, we'd be walking in at pitch black. We would hear something over to the side. And I was scared to death, thinking a monster is going to jump out and get me. And my dad would say, let's go over there and see what that is. And I'd be like, what? And he'd say, yeah, we're going to go over and see what that is. And it happened so many times when I was small that he was teaching me to not run from your fears, but move toward your fear. And when you move toward your fear with the Father, in this case, my Father, earthly Father beside me, it changes you over time. And so in these times, I've just been amazed at how God, our parent, who is always caring and concerned says, you go ahead and move toward. I know you're afraid, Ken, but you go ahead and don't run away from that. You move toward that fear, and we'll see what it's about, and then we'll address it. And God has shown me this time and time again, especially over the past few months.
Just need to pause there and say to our folks that are listening, did you hear that? Did you hear what Ken just shared with you? Because if you didn't, hit that back button and go listen to it again. God is with you. God is with you. We might be beyond the Christmas season. It doesn't matter. God is still with you. Thank you for that reminder, Ken. Are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
Well, this was the part that, speaking of facing your fears, but yes.
It's been fun as we do this, because this is the part that we don't share with any of our guests. And what you just said is the number one response that we get. I promise you these are painless, and they're meant to be fun, and hopefully to help our listeners get to know you in a slightly different way than what we've been talking about. So, Tim, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Why don't you go ahead?
So this one comes a bit out of left field, but it's a fun one. What's your favorite snack food?
My favorite snack food would be potato chips.
Any special kind?
Cheddar Lay's potato chips. They're the pre-commercial.
Ken, what do people misunderstand about you?
They probably misunderstand my intensity most. I think that can be easily misunderstood. My intensity comes more from my urgency and care rather than it does any sense of frustration.
What is the last thing that you read?
The very last thing that I read, I'm still reading. It's a John Grisham novel, A Time for Mercy.
What brings you joy these days?
My grandson, a new grandson, brings me great joy, though we can't be in person. Once again, the gifts of technology have made it possible for us to watch him grow and develop.
What music brings you meaning or motivates you or brings you peace? You choose which question you want to answer.
I would say the music that brings me the most peace are old. I have old hymns from my childhood, from the church, and I don't mind answering all of them. The one that gets me going is I turn on my Bon Jovi radio on Sirius XM, and I can get really into the concert of John Bon Jovi very easily.
Thank you, Ken. Told you that would be painless.
Thank you.
Thank you for, again, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us. And as I have heard Tim say to other guests, I'm going to steal it this time. He might echo it, but thank you for your witness today and your invitation to folks to be present to the God that is with us and around us and to step into those fears. I am grateful for the time that we've had together today. My last question for you is simply this. Any last minute words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything in this time together, other than to say that keep realizing what a gift it is. Keep realizing the gift that you've been given in Christ Jesus and in one another, because it's those sense of connections that ultimately will sustain us for the long haul.
Tim, any last minute words of wisdom that you want to share?
I was just going to say it's that connection that's kept us as friends. It has to be a God connection, or Ken would have given up on me a long time ago.
Vice versa as well, just the same way. Yep.
Ken, I truly, you and I don't say this to each other because we just know it, but I'm truly grateful for you and your witness. Appreciate your friendship. And now people know that there's a real Ken Ramsey because I talk about you all the time.
Yes, we're real, but I appreciate the opportunity. It's a blessing to to be able to share in this format. So thank you.
Thank you. Gosh, folks, even listening to that a second time, because clearly I was a part of the conversation, and then going back and editing our conversation, I hope you took a moment to pause. Ken offered us a lot of wisdom, a lot of guidance, and a lot of coaching as leaders throughout this entire episode. But I know too many leaders in the life of the church who are feeling weary right now. And part of that weariness comes from our inability to stop and pause. I'm not going to get preachy here. I just want to invite you to stop and pause. As I've been doing and will continue to do, I want to offer you a series of questions. And this, once again, was another hard one for me to just nail it down to 2 questions. So I have 3 questions, but a couple of them may have more than one part. So here you go. Here's your first question. In your leadership, where is God saying to you, let's go over here and see what that is? Question 2, what is one step you'll take towards rebuilding the church? Notice I didn't say restarting or resetting. I said rebuilding. And the third question, this one has multiple parts. Where do you need to adapt? What new practices do you need to adopt? And what part of your leadership do you need to become more adept in? And once you've named those 3 things, here's what I want you to do. You don't have to do all 3 of those in this next week. I want you to identify one action that you will take this week to act on either adapting, adopting, or becoming more adept. And with that, let me remind you once again, you can find these questions on the show notes page at transformingmission.org/podcast. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.